At 0600 hours, the Coast Guard cutter Monroe was 300 meters south of Iceland, locked onto the stern of a 330-meter oil tanker called the Mariner and running out of ocean. The tanker was making a beeline for Russian waters. They thought they had enough time. Then the window got a lot smaller. At 0847, a flash message hit the Monroe's Combat Information Center from Sublant, Submarine Force Atlantic. A Russian submarine and 2 surface combatants had sortied from the Northern Fleet and were heading east into the Atlantic on an intercept course for the Mariner. Classification: likely Akula class, speed estimated 20+ knots submerged. Current position east of the GIUK Gap and closing. The Monroe is a law enforcement vessel, 4,500 tons, a 57mm gun, and exactly 0 ways to find, track, or destroy a submarine. If the sub reached the Mariner before the Americans could board, the entire dynamic flipped. You do not fast rope onto a tanker's deck while a Russian attack submarine sits at periscope depth a few thousand yards away. Not unless you want to find out what a torpedo does to a ship with no armor. Moscow was betting on exactly that math. Send the sub, shrink the window, and force the Americans to choose. Board now in terrible weather and risk the team, or wait for conditions and risk facing a Russian warship alongside the target. Either way, Russia wins. The tanker reaches Murmansk or the Americans back off, and 19 other sanctioned tankers that just switched to Russian flags learn that a painted tricolor and a submarine are all the insurance they need. Solid bet. However, Russia has been testing American resolve at sea since the Cold War. Their win record in that department makes the New York Jets look good. Within 3 hours of that flash message, C-17 Globemaster transports began landing at RAF bases across the United Kingdom. At least 10 of them. Ground crews unloaded MH-60 Blackhawks, MH-47 Chinooks, and crates stenciled for the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers. These are no ordinary pilots. They're the taxi service for Tier 1 operators whenever they need to go to a really bad neighborhood. At RAF Fairford, CV-22 Ospreys ran fast rope drills in broad daylight. At RAF Mildenhall, an AC-130 J Ghost Rider gunship rolled off a cargo ramp, a flying artillery platform carrying a 105mm howitzer, a 30mm chain gun, and the ability to put precision munitions through a window from 15,000 feet. OSINT analysts posted every tail number within hours. Flight tracking sites went white-hot. The message was loud enough to hear in Moscow. The United States was coming for this ship, and it was bringing enough hardware to handle anything Russia put in the water. But that was the show. Every C-17, tail number, and flight tracking hit was designed to be seen. The real strike package was already at sea, riding a ship nobody was watching, waiting for a window that hadn't opened yet. The submarine had to cross the GIUK Gap, the stretch of deep water between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom. And that was the worst piece of ocean on Earth for a Russian submarine commander to drive through. NATO has been listening to this choke point since 1952. If a shrimp burps down there, NATO doesn't just hear it. They know its name, what it had for breakfast, and where it's heading for dinner. Every Soviet boat that tried to cross it during the Cold War knew the math. Most of them got caught. The ones that made it through got found later, and that was with 1970s technology. The technology waiting for this submarine was 2 generations ahead of anything the Soviet Navy ever faced. And unlike the Cold War, the Americans didn't have to wait for the sub to come to them. They went looking. At 30,000 feet over the North Atlantic, a U.S. Navy P-8 Poseidon had been dropping sonobuoy patterns since the submarine reportedly broke cover. The P-8 carries 129 sonobuoys, each one a small canister that hits the water, sinks to a preset depth, deploys a hydrophone, and listens for what a submarine cannot hide. Pump vibrations, propeller cavitation, and the low groan of a steel pressure hull compressing at depth. Think of it as scattering 129 microphones across hundreds of square miles of ocean. Here's the physics problem that bothers submarine commanders. Sound travels 4 times faster in water than in air, and it never really stops. A submarine's pump vibration at 200 Hz can travel 60 miles through deep ocean channels. The sub can go slow, it can go quiet, but it cannot stop the ocean from carrying its noise to a hydrophone it never knew was there. The submarine has to be quieter than all of them at once while moving at 20 knots toward a deadline. It's like trying to sneak back into the house at 3 a.m. after a night out on the town. No matter how quiet you think you are, your wife is already awake. You're just choosing between sleeping outside with the dogs or facing the music because sneaking past her was never actually an option. Once a sonobuoy gets a whisper, the P-8's computers triangulate the bearing within seconds. The P-8's radar watches for the other thing a submarine cannot avoid forever: periscope masts and snorkel heads breaking the surface. And its magnetic anomaly detector reads the Earth's magnetic field for the disturbance that thousands of tons of moving steel create underwater. A submarine can go quiet. It cannot stop being made of metal. And the American P-8 was not alone. A Royal Air Force P-8 was working the North Sea. A Norwegian P-8 covered the Norwegian Sea approaches, and an RAFR C-135W rivet joint, a signals intelligence aircraft the size of a 707, was copying every Russian communication in the theater. 3 nations' submarine hunting aircraft sharing data in real time. The Russian submarine was driving into a surveillance net that covered the entire northern Atlantic approach. And every mile it advanced, the net got tighter. The P-8s were not just watching, they were herding. When the American P-8 got a bearing fix east of Iceland, it dropped a sonobuoy barrier ahead of the sub's projected course. The sub commander went into sprint and drift, full power to 25 knots to clear the field, then engines cut, coasting in near silence. Textbook evasion. The P-8 had already dropped a second pattern 5 miles ahead. The submarine drifted right into it. He tried something smarter. Tucked his boat under a commercial shipping lane, container ships throwing off enough propeller noise to mask a submarine in the clutter. For a few hours, it worked. Then the rivet joint intercepted a course change order on Russian naval frequencies. The RAF P-8 repositioned and dropped a pattern exactly where the new heading would take him. He thought he was hiding in the noise. They were reading his mail. Next, the sub made a hard turn with a simultaneous depth change, a knuckle, a column of turbulent water that scatters sonar returns. Against a single tracker, it buys you minutes. Against 3 P-8s cross-queuing from different bearings, it bought him nothing. The Norwegian P-8 held contact without interruption. Last card. He took the boat below the thermocline and cut to battery power. No pumps, no turbines, near silent. The sonobuoy net went fuzzy. Then the American P-8 switched to depth-set buoys below the layer and made a low pass with its magnetic anomaly detector. A submarine can silence its engines. It can't stop being 10,000 tons of steel. Contact regained. Every evasion cost the one thing he could not afford: time. A submarine running sprint drift zigzags with sonobuoy fields is not making 20 knots. It's making 12, maybe 10. Every hour the P-8 forced him off course was another hour the Americans bought to wait for weather. But the race was not just about slowing the submarine. It was about making it irrelevant before it arrived. By evening, on January 6th, 2 Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, the USS Bulkley and the USS Paul Ignatius, joined the Monroe's formation around the Mariner. Each Burke displaces 9,200 tons and carries an Aegis combat system, 96 vertical launch cells, and an AN/SQ Q-89 sonar suite purpose-built to early retire submarines. One of these destroyers carries more firepower than most countries can put to sea. The Monroe now had 2 of them. Their sonar suites locked the submarine's acoustic signature the moment they had the data from the P-8's overhead. Active sonar started pinging. Loud, deliberate, designed to be heard inside the submarine's pressure hull. If you've ever been in a swimming pool and heard someone slap the surface, multiply that by 1,000. Active sonar at full power is a physical force. It rattles fittings. It echoes through the hull. And every ping tells the submarine commander the same thing. I know exactly where you are, and I'm not being subtle about it. The sub-commander was a professional. He knew what every one of those signals meant. He also knew the Americans were not pinging to find him. They already had him. They were pinging to make sure he knew it. An Arleigh Burke engaging a submarine launches an ASROC, a rocket that flies to the target area, drops a torpedo into the water, and goes active on the submarine's hull from launch to impact, roughly 30 seconds. Imagine getting a letter from the IRS, except the letter delivers itself by flying to your house, kicks the door down, and follows you from room to room reading your violations out loud. And it's fast, it's angry, and it absolutely will not accept return to sender. You do not outrun a rocket-delivered torpedo when 3 different platforms already have your position plotted. And here is the part that sat heaviest on that submarine commander's shoulders. The Monroe was right there on the surface, unarmored, a 1-torpedo problem. He could take the shot, and then he would have 2 Arleigh Burke destroyers with his position fixed, P-8s overhead with torpedoes ready, and the absolute certainty that firing a single weapon meant he and his crew would not survive the next 60 seconds. That is the arithmetic of submarine intimidation against the most powerful navy on Earth. He was there to escort, not to fight. The Americans understood that perfectly, and they were not waiting for him to change his mind. The distance kept shrinking from both sides. The Mariner, still 9 knots toward Murmansk, still eating 9 nautical miles of American window every hour. The submarine, zigzagging through P-8 sonobuoy fields, burning hours on evasion routes it never planned to take, but still grinding west, maybe 20 hours from the tanker's position. Maybe less if it found clean water. Russian territorial waters, still the finish line that made the tanker untouchable. 3 clocks, all running against the Americans. And one more variable that nobody could control, the weather. For 16 days, the North Atlantic had been doing what it does best in January. 15-foot swells, horizontal rain, visibility measured in yards. You can't fly a helicopter in that. You can't fast rope onto a pitching deck in that. You especially cannot do it at night in winter, 300 miles from land, onto a ship whose crew has already refused one boarding and has no reason to cooperate with the next one. The Monroe had the warrant. The destroyers had the sub-boxed. The P-8s were buying time. And none of it mattered if the sea would not go flat long enough to put operators on the Mariner's deck. Every day the weather held, the submarine got 12 hours closer. Then that all changed. January 7th, early morning. The Atlantic blinked first. Swells dropped from 15 feet to 4. Wind went down. Visibility opened to miles. For the first time in 16 days, a helicopter could safely work over the tanker. It was go time. On the Monroe's flight deck, a Coast Guard MH-65 Dolphin helicopter spun up. The morning air was hazy, residual mist off the storm system that had finally broken, the kind of gray that blurs the line between ocean and sky. The MSRT, Maritime Security Response Team, the Coast Guard's Tier 1 ship seizure unit, loaded onto the helicopter in full boarding kit. Weapons, breaching equipment, flex cuffs, everything for a hostile ship seizure 300 miles from the nearest hospital. The MH-65 lifted off the Monroe's deck, cleared the superstructure, and banked toward the Mariner's silhouette in the haze. From half a mile out, the Mariner filled the windshield, rust-streaked hull, the crudely painted name already peeling after 2 weeks of salt spray, and the Russian tricolor on the stern that had started this whole thing. The MH-65 circled once to confirm the fast rope point on the forward deck. Below, crew members were visible on the weather deck, watching the helicopter. The MSRT operators checked their kit one last time. Safeties, carabiners, gloves. The pilot brought the MH-65 into a hover over the ship. Then the ropes went out from the tanker's bridge. The captain watched a single Coast Guard helicopter approach from the Monroe. The same cutter that had been following them for 16 days. 1 helicopter, 1 cutter. 33 crew members had been briefed that if a boarding came, it would look exactly like this. Small, manageable, something the Russian Navy could respond to before it mattered. The captain reached for his radio to signal Murmansk. He never completed that transmission. Because that is exactly when 2 shapes emerged from the haze behind the MH-65. MH-6M Little Birds, under 3,000 pounds each, barely bigger than a car, small enough to fit inside a C-130, slid into formation alongside the Coast Guard's helicopter like they'd been there the whole time. The Night Stalkers' signature aircraft, the same airframe that carried the operators into Mogadishu and Abbottabad. The crew of the Mariner was now watching 3 helicopters bearing down on them, where 30 seconds ago there had been none. The 160th SOAR had stashed the little birds on the Monroe before the pursuit even made the news. While C-17s delivered Blackhawks and Ghost Riders and Ospreys to air bases across England, the buildup that every analyst on Earth was tracking, the actual strike package had been riding a Coast Guard cutter for 2 weeks. The Navy SEALs rode the external bench seats, legs dangling over the North Atlantic in January. The MH-6 doesn't block the weather, it just moves you through it faster. 300 miles from the nearest coastline in a helicopter that weighs less than a pickup truck, with armed operators on the outside. Nobody, not OSINT, not Moscow, not the Mariner's crew, knew they existed until they were in the air and closing on the tanker. The first operators on the Mariner's deck were not SEALs. They were the Coast Guard. The MSRT fast-roped from the MH-65 onto the Mariner's forward deck, operators sliding down thick ropes onto a surface that had been pitching violently for 2 weeks and was now, for the first time, stable enough to land on. These are not standard boarding teams. They train alongside SEALs and Delta for exactly this. The reason is not glamour. It is legal. Only the Coast Guard has federal authority to execute a seizure warrant on the high seas. That's why a Coast Guard cutter spent 16 days in January storms instead of a Navy destroyer. The United States deployed 2 Aegis destroyers, 3 nation sub-hunting aircraft, a signals intelligence platform, a Special Operations Aviation Regiment, and Navy SEALs. And the people who actually took the ship were wearing Coast Guard patches. The military built the operation. The military protected it. The Coast Guard took the ship. They went for the bridge first. Communication secured. Navigation locked. Scuttling capability gone in the opening seconds. If the captain had gotten a distress signal to the Russian Navy before the MSRT reached the wheelhouse, the entire situation changes. A Russian warship responding to a distress call from a Russian flag vessel has a very different legal standing than a submarine lurking on an intercept course. The captain did not get that signal out. The MSERT was on the bridge before the crew understood what was happening. Within 90 seconds of the first boots on the bridge, the Monroe's Combat Information Center had confirmation. Bridge secured. All communications dark. The Mariner was no longer transmitting on any frequency. The captain and bridge crew were flex-cuffed and moved to a holding area on the bridge wing. The MSRT split into clearing teams and started working down through the ship's interior. Narrow corridors, steep ladderways, red-lit passageways designed for merchant sailors, not tactical operations. Every hatch was a blind corner. Every compartment had to be cleared before the team could move on. The engineering spaces were next, because whoever holds the engine room decides where 330 meters of tanker goes. The MSRT was not about to let the crew scuttle the ship with them on it. The team cleared compartment by compartment. Standard hostile boarding procedure. No room unchecked. No assumption of compliance until every crew member was accounted for and mustered on deck. 33 crew members searched, separated, secured. Behind the tactical teams came the evidence units, chain of custody, digital forensics, every navigation log and communication record preserved for a federal courtroom. Hard drives pulled, satellite communication records imaged. The ship had been running sanctioned cargo for years, and everything the MSRT collected would eventually sit in front of a judge. Above the deck, the little birds circled in slow orbits. SEALs on the benches, weapons visible, filmed in real time by the tanker crew's own cameras, streaming to Russian state media. The footage caught everything: the egg-shaped fuselage, the operators on the skids, the deliberate circles overhead. Nobody on the Mariner needed a translator. You were standing on a tanker deck watching the Coast Guard take your bridge while Navy SEALs orbit above you. Sitting this one out is the smart choice.